and thanks for joining us on a special election night edition of Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what we're looking at. It's Election Day in Illinois. We check in with the Board of Elections on early ballots, voter turnout, and much more.
Voters will decide on a signature piece of Mayor Johnson's progressive agenda. Our Spotlight Politics team on Bring Chicago Home and other key results to watch.
In Chicago, when you feed your ballot into a machine on Election Day, you're essentially putting it in a ballot box with two compartments.
And what exactly happens to your ballot after you vote? WTTW News explains.
And we'll kick off our special election coverage shortly, but first, here are some of today's other top stories. A popular gun manufacturer is facing a lawsuit from the city of Chicago over guns that the city claims can easily be converted into illegal machine guns. The city says in the last 2 years, it's recovered 1,100 Glock guns that have been converted using an auto sear, which is a cheap device known as a Glock switch. And they've been used in a variety of crimes, from homicide to attempted robbery. The lawsuit filed today in Cook County Circuit Court alleges the company knows how to fix the guns but refuses to do so, thus unreasonably endangering Chicagoans. The suit is the first to use Illinois' new Firearms Industry Responsibility Act, made law last year, in an effort to hold gun companies accountable for public safety.
Arlington Heights officials reportedly attempting to move the goalpost to keep Bears Stadium plans on track. The village is reportedly proposing to lower the property tax burden the Bears would have to pay on the property and then negotiate tax hikes in subsequent years. The Bears have unveiled rough plans for a $2 billion private investment to build a publicly owned stadium just south of Soldier Field on a lakefront. They still do own that giant parcel of land that used to be Arlington International Racecourse.
Several Chicago nonprofits have a couple million more dollars to work with after another round of giving from philanthropist Mackenzie Scott. This time, Scott is giving a total of $640 million to 361 small nonprofits around the country after an open call for applications last year. Among local recipients are racial justice organization Communities United, ALS advocates I Am ALS, and the Alliance to End Homelessness in suburban Cook County. These and several other groups received $1 or $2 million each. These are just a few on your screen. Through her foundation, Yield Giving, Scott began giving away billions in 2019 after her divorce from Amazon founder Jeff Bezos.
And it's that time of year almost. Lollapalooza has announced its 2024 music lineup. The annual mega festival will take place August 1st through 4th in Grant Park. Headlines this year include SZA, am I pronouncing it? SZA. Yeah. Tyler, the Creator, Blink-182, The Killers, Future X, and Hozier. Tickets go on sale Thursday, and you can find the full lineup on our website. Shows you what I know about
How should I know?
Today's
You're the
big
musician.
stars.
Still to come, a look at the key races to watch in a special election night edition of Spotlight Politics.
And first, reporter Nick Blumberg is live from the Board of Elections to talk voter turnout and much more. We check in with him right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jin and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Fewer Chicagoans turned out to vote early than they did during the primary election 4 years ago. So how's Election Day turnout looking, and how smoothly have things been running? Reporter Nick Blumberg joins us now with more from the Chicago Elections Board in the Loop Super Site. Nick.
Well, Paris, certainly turnout today has been pretty sluggish, but we are seeing that late afternoon, evening rush of interest. There is a line down the block along Lake outside of the super site here. I'm here with Max Bever from the Chicago Board of Elections to talk about all things elections. Thank you for joining us on a busy day. For starters, just what are we seeing today in terms of turnout?
Well, we are seeing a lot less turnout than we'd like to see for a presidential primary election. We're low even by primary standards, but we're low by even municipal election standards, generally known as some of our lowest turnout elections. But that's been picking up. From 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., we saw almost 20,000 voters show up. We're expecting our biggest surge happening right now. As you said, it's nice to see a line right outside the super site. And voters have until 7 p.m. either to go to their assigned precinct polling place, or we've got 51 vote centers, all those ward early voting sites, and our super site downtown open till 7 p.m. Nice thing for voters there is that you can vote at any of those sites, no matter where you live.
And I know there are still, tens of thousands thousands of mail-in ballots that folks have received, but that haven't come back to you as of last night. Are you hopeful you'll see a surge from those either in the coming days by mail, or maybe they'll come down and drop them off today?
Yes, we expect a lot of vote-by-mail ballots returned through our secure drop boxes and in the mail today. However, those aren't going to be processed and counted for tonight's election results. That's going to be processed over the next few days. So, depending on the turnout tonight, if the races are close, we might have to wait and see how some of those vote-by-mail ballots come back in. We had 66,000 returned as of last night. Those are going to be counted with election night results. But we've got over 109,000 vote-by-mail ballots that are still out there. Now, not all of those are going to be returned back. We're expecting probably more closer to 70 to 80,000. But that might be quite big in a citywide race.
Yeah, certainly some close races that it could help decide there. You know, you mentioned the sluggish turnout compared to previous primaries. Is that something that you tend to see when the top of the ticket isn't necessarily as contested?
It is common when there isn't a very competitive ballot, either Democratic or Republican. In fact, we're seeing numbers closer to the 2012 presidential primary. Presidential primaries, they can be a little bit all over the place. When it's more competitive, especially for presidential candidates, you're seeing nearly 56%, maybe 60% citywide turnout. When it's on the lower end, like 2012, you're seeing 24% turnout. Now, we've got more registered voters than ever in Chicago. So while we might cast more ballots ultimately, and I think that we will than 2012, we might have a lower citywide turnout just because we've got more voters.
I know there was a fire that forced you to move one of the voting sites, kind of last minute. Other than that, have things been going pretty smoothly with all the physical locations?
Well, the only thing about a low turnout that's got a silver lining is that generally it also means a smooth election day. We had just a handful of sites that did not open by 6 a.m. Most were open by 6:15 a.m. We're not having any polling places that are open past 7 p.m., so all polls will close at 7. And complaint-wise, when it comes to our help desk in Election Central, it's been pretty sleepy too, but that's the good news.
All right, well, hopefully things are picking up here in the next hour and a half or so. Max Bever, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And we will have more from the election super site here in the Loop later on in the program, but for now, Paris, back to you.
All right, Nick, thanks very much. We look forward to that. And up next, our Spotlight Politics team digs into the big races on the ballot, so stick around.
And as we just heard from Nick Blumberg, turnout for today's elections, not so great. That is despite a high-profile ballot measure for Chicago voters to consider and some contentious races across the state. Here to delve into all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Venneke, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. So, Heather, the Bring Chicago Home ballot measure in the hands of voters now. We all recall this very extended legal fight that's been going on over it, that we now know, of course, votes that are cast today and during early voting, they will be counted. But remind us what a yes vote on this ballot measure would mean.
Well, it will give the city council the power to basically change the way sales of real estate transactions are taxed. Right now, regardless of how much you buy a property for, you pay the same real estate transfer tax. This measure would allow the city council to say, you know what, if you buy or sell a property of more than $1 million, you pay a little bit more. And they're going to use that money, they say, to help the unhoused in Chicago. And this is really sort of the centerpiece of the progressive political movement, even dating before Mayor Brandon Johnson was even considering a run for mayor. It was endorsed by former Mayor Lori Lightfoot in the 2019 mayoral election. She reversed that position, and it has been the source of just really concerted efforts, and it all comes down to the vote today.
Of course it does. What's the campaigning been like on this issue, and what are your expectations? Is this going to be close?
Well, it's been a really strange campaign, right? It was upended by the legal fight because a Cook County judge invalidated it. And then the appellate court reversed that decision, and then the Supreme Court upheld that appellate court decision. But that meant really that both supporters and opponents didn't really know what was going to happen. So it muted
at least of all voters, by the way.
Right.
Very
so
confusing.
it really muted those efforts. Now, that's not to say millions of dollars were not spent on both sides, because it absolutely was. Sort of how that all sort of comes out in the end, I think, is a very big question, and does sort of these arguments against the form of the ballot question continue sort of creating legal challenges as we move forward.
So Mayor Johnson, he's spoken passionately about this issue, in particular at a rally before the city council cleared the Bring Chicago Home ordinance in November. Here's a little bit of what he had to say then.
We know that almost 70% of those who are unhoused live in communities like mine, in black communities. Yes. And it is well past time that we prioritize the interests of working people, but especially those who have been harmed the most. So we're not just bringing Chicago home, we're not just raising revenue, we're actually demonstrating how the city of Chicago is leading the way for the rest of the world.
Heather, this is one of the mayor's signature issues. How much is at stake for him if this doesn't pass?
It is going to be a big test of his political muscle. Even though, as I said, this predated him, he has really embraced these progressive political organizations. And whether it succeeds or fails, it will be considered sort of a litmus test of his sort of political power nearly a year into his tenure as mayor of Chicago.
Political power, and I think also just where the progressive movement is, how strong it is. This is a movement that got him into the mayor's office, but there has since been some trouble with that. And so I think it is both a test of Johnson himself, because he's been out in front on it, but not exclusively. It's not as if he's been fronting the commercials or the ads for it or anything. But still, it sort of shows where the progressive movement can go. Can it get out the vote?
Led by the Chicago Teachers Union, who's poured money into this campaign as well, and who has exerted a lot of effort to try and get out the vote for this issue this cycle.
Yeah, something that we talked about last week as well, with CTU's role in trying to gin up support for this issue. Amanda, this measure gives the city council the power to increase the real estate the real estate transfer tax. Thank you. Heather said it earlier, on property sales over $1 million.
It is a mouthful.
If this passes, though, is the city council going to go ahead with it? Do you think they'll raise the tax?
Well, I mean, I think you noted it in your introduction to Johnson's remarks at that rally a while back, and the city council had to vote to put it on the ballot. That we can see very much as an indicator. If voters give you that power, why would you not use it? That would be its own sense of sort of frustration, I would think, with voters, and particularly the movement that, as we've just been talking about, has spent a lot of money and energy to put it there. So while the opponents are not going to stop, and I think, as Heather alluded to just a bit ago, we could see additional court challenges, the expectation would be that, yes, the city council is going to take advantage. And further, this would allow Johnson to hold to his promise of not increasing property taxes, just something that, again, the opponents say will be sort of a de facto property tax increase. Particularly, they say it's not just on the mansions, although I think that is a very smart way for the advocates to try and get this passed by calling it a mansion tax. It's also on businesses, and you could think, folks who buy maybe a 3-flat.
Yeah, I'll be looking at the margin in this case if it does pass. So if it passes by sort of a significant, comfortable margin, the city council is going to be under a lot of pressure to sort of impose the will of the voters. I think if it's a little bit narrower, you're going to see people like Alderman Brendan Riley, who represents downtown, sort of say, hey, look, this was a split decision. This isn't something that we have to do, and we shouldn't. And so that, I think, is really where perhaps today's low turnout could really sort of come into play. Beyond just a victory or a loss.
So another big race that's on the ballot, Paris, you've been following Cook County State's Attorney's race, and the Democrats competing to replace, of course, the outgoing Kim Foxx. A lot of money in this race, some sharp exchanges between the two candidates. What's at stake here, and how different are Clayton Harris and Eileen O'Neill Burke when it comes to their approach to fighting crime?
Well, the big difference in their approach to this office centers around retail theft. So Eileen O'Neill Burke says that we're going to prosecute retail theft of goods over $300 as a felony. That's consistent with state law. Under Kim Foxx, they've raised that threshold to $1,000. So if you steal $1,000 worth of goods from a store, or more, you get charged with a felony. Below that, you get charged with a misdemeanor. Mr. Harris has said he's going to continue that policy, saying misdemeanor isn't just a slap on the wrist. I mean, you can charge, significant jail time for misdemeanors, but we're going to continue that policy of maybe going a little softer on low-level crime. They both said that they plan to go forward with the no cash bail provision. Well, they have to, but they would prosecute any case involving a gun. Eileen O'Neill Burke perhaps a little stronger than any kind of armed robbery on the CTA. Again, both of them saying anything with a gun. Clayton Harris. Clayton Harris is endorsed by Tony Preckwinkle, who also endorsed Kim Foxx. That's not to say that Clayton Harris is going to approach the office the exact same way as Kim Foxx would, but he would be closer to that progressive vision than Eileen O'Neill Burke, who's won some crossover support here, especially with money, by saying she'll be tougher on crime.
Heather, as Paris mentioned, Clayton Harris has the backing of the establishment, including Tony Preckwinkle. What does the outcome of this race mean for her still as, sort of the head of the Cook County Democratic Party?
Well, it's a big test because not only is she Cook County Board President, not only was she sort of the mentor to Brandon Johnson, but she's also sort of put the full force of the Democratic Party behind Clayton Harris III. And if Eileen O'Neill Burke can win a Democratic primary without the endorsement of the Cook County Democratic Party, she's going to face a lot of questions about what that endorsement truly means. Now, I should say that we were having basically the same discussion 4 years ago when Kim Foxx was running for re-election. She was under fire basically from all sides, and she pulled out a comfortable victory both in the Democratic Party and then in the general election. The issues are very similar this time around. The question is, will the result be very similar, at least when it comes to Tony Preckwinkle's chosen candidate?
Like as a rule, and I'm sorry, man, like in a low turnout election, I mean, doesn't so much come down to who has the boots on the ground. That's the machine backing. I would think that you have a better chance if you've got that kind of so-called machine backing in a low turnout election, because they're going to get the folks out, and other folks just aren't motivated.
So quickly, I want to get to a congressional race before we run out of time. And obviously, we should note to viewers, we will be back here at 10 o'clock to talk about a whole lot more. But Amanda, a few high-profile congressional races, particularly in the 7th. We've got veteran Congressman Danny Davis facing 4 challengers, including Chicago Treasurer Melissa Conyers-Ervin. Is this the biggest threat to Davis getting a 15th term?
Well, I mean, he had a pretty tough go-round for his current term. And then you saw Keena Collins really nearly clinch this seat. She's trying to run again, but she does not quite have that progressive backing that she did. You also have some of that split between Melissa Conyers-Ervin, which could be very helpful to Davis as he seeks this additional term. The more opponents you have, the easier it is for an incumbent to slide on through. Polls are still open, so I don't want to make too many predictions there. But Conyers-Ervin certainly does have some name recognition, given that she is city treasurer, but she also has, along with that, some ethical troubles that have really confounded her throughout this race.
I just want to quickly say, Keena Collins a couple years ago came really close. Just a coincidence now he's got 4 challengers to split that ticket. I just wonder if he had something to do with that.
Yeah, you should run. Everybody get in the race.
Exactly.
Let's all do it. All right. So obviously a lot more to talk about later on, team. That is Spotlight for now. Heather, Amanda, Paris, we'll see you guys in a little bit. And as I mentioned, our Spotlight Politics team will be back again live at 10 o'clock tonight to go through some of the results of these races. Be sure to join us then. But up next, we check back in with Nick Blumberg, who's reporting live from the Chicago Board of Elections Loop Super Site.
Now we check back in with WTTW News reporter Nick Blumberg, who is at the Chicago Loop Super Site polling place. Nick, we heard about the low turnout, so what are demographics like so far?
Well, in terms of the age breakdown, Paris, it's the way things often go in elections. As of 5 o'clock, the Board of Elections said about 57% of voters who'd cast a ballot so far were age 55 or up. Although I will say we've had 2 first-time voters who got nice big rounds of applauses from the election workers here at the super site just in the hour or so that we've been there. So good to see younger folks doing their civic duty. We heard so much about how this compares to other presidential primary elections in terms of turnout. Also looking, just in terms of what things had been like by the end of the day for last year's municipal elections, those were about 33% when the polls closed at 7 o'clock last year when, we elected the mayor and a whole bunch of the city council. So not quite clear whether we'll hit those numbers. One of the other things that we heard that was interesting in terms of demographics party-wise, Max told us that there's been an increased interest in nonpartisan ballots. So that would be a ballot that you can pull where you're just voting on the referendum question, not the presidential primary. That's, especially something that might make sense this year when, both President Biden and former President Trump essentially have it sewed up.
Nick, every election cycle we hear stories of judges that didn't show up or someone was drunk and caused a stir. The Elections Board says things have been running smoothly. Any irregularities so far?
No, it sounds like it's been pretty quiet. People were staying off the sauce, hopefully. He said, a couple places open 6:15, 6:20, but everybody was able to either hang around or come back or go to another nearby one of the all-city sites. So not anything that's staying open late. There was a bit of a spat earlier in the day when Congressman Chuy Garcia accused his challenger, Alderperson Ray Lopez's campaign, of bringing donuts and envelopes of money to election judges. Ostensibly for them to buy lunch. That is not any reporting that has been confirmed by the Board of Elections or by any law enforcement authorities yet. And the Board of Elections made clear they are not an investigative body. This is something that they are happy to participate in the appropriate authorities. Certainly would not be appropriate to be giving election judges any cash, but there is that was an accusation that has yet to be looked into, and it will not be the Board of Elections doing that.
Wow, we'll have to see where that one goes. That's a little bizarre even by Chicago standards. Okay, very quickly, Nick, still about an hour left to vote. What are the options for last-minute voters?
Well, certainly you can show up in person. If you're in line at 7, you can stay in line and cast your ballot. If you've got a vote-by-mail ballot that you haven't returned, you can bring those in. There are secure drop boxes at several sites, a site in every ward and a couple of super sites around the city, as well as drop-off sites at the United Center, Wintrust Arena, and Wrigley Field. But you do need to get those in by 7 o'clock. So if you still haven't cast your ballot, get moving.
All right, Nick, you'll be moving around throughout the evening. We'll see you later tonight. And Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. In case you haven't figured it out yet, today is Election Day in Illinois. So what happens to your ballot after you vote? As part of our Emmy Award-winning series, WTTW News Explains, Amanda Vinicky explores the journey of a Chicago ballot.
You've done your research, made your choices, cast your ballot. Then you cast a couple more on behalf of your dead relatives. Hey, it's the Chicago way. Just kidding. So, you earned your I voted sticker. What happens next? In Chicago, when you feed your ballot into a machine on Election Day, you're essentially putting it in a ballot box with 2 compartments. Ballots with write-in candidates stay separate in one compartment. Election judges will count these by hand at the end of the night. All other ballots are scanned and counted by machine. Unlucky for the judges, otherwise it would be a lot of counting. Once the polls close, the machine spits out a tape of the totals, like a receipt. Election judges work in bipartisan teams at each precinct to keep an eye on everything. They certify things went smoothly and that ballots weren't compromised when they sign the receipts and other legally binding documents. Then they use a cellular device to transmit the totals downtown to Election Central. That's when we begin to see the results. But it's not all high-tech. The paper ballots that got fed into the machine don't get tossed. They go into a big blue hard-shell case on wheels, packed up with a pretty bow, or rather a security seal, to ensure nobody messes with the precious cargo. From then on, anyone who touches the case has to sign a chain of custody form, like evidence in one of those TV procedural dramas. Thousands of suitcases from every Chicago precinct go to a warehouse where they stay, signed, sealed, delivered, for at least 22 months, just in case. Some will be opened and reviewed as an extra check. By law, a state audit recounts votes from 5% of all precincts. Procedures differ slightly for voting by mail, early voting, and those who vote from overseas, but not by much. All legitimate ballots are counted, kept secure at every turn, and end up in the same warehouse for safekeeping. So, wear that sticker with pride and peace of mind. Happy voting.
And you can watch more from our Emmy award-winning series, WTTW News Explains, on our website. That's WTTW.com/explains.
And that's our show. Be sure to join us live at 10 for more special election night coverage. We'll have results and analysis with our Spotlight Politics team. And until then, check out our website for the latest results as the polls close in just about an hour. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and see you at 10.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to be a multilingual law firm that provides translators for a variety of languages.